For my second discussion of the apology, I'd like to take a step back and think about philosophy more generally and the two aspects of it that Plato thinks are important. One of them, I think we would all agree, is got to be part of philosophy. The other one might come as a little bit of a surprise. So remember that philosophy is formed out of two words, philos and sophia. The word means a friend or a lover of wisdom. So philosophy is the love of wisdom. The philosopher is the friend, or better, the lover of wisdom. And wisdom could be understood as a comprehensive and systematic elaboration of the first principles of being, of whatever is, that provides definitive answers to the fundamental questions about the origins, nature, and destiny of the universe, the good for human beings, and the ways to obtain it, which guides our actions in all circumstances. So the way I think about it, as a wise person knows what's what and knows what to do about it. Having wisdom will prepare you for any situation, including being put on trial with the possibility of execution. If that's correct, then Socrates, if he's making the right choice, is making it because he is the wise man, and that suggests that maybe the right choice to do when you're putting on trial for philosophy is to allow them to kill you for it if they want. Oddly. Okay, now there are going to be two aspects to this. So there's one part we might call the intellectual aspect, the aspect about knowing. And philosophers typically, again, divide philosophy into ethical, metaphysical, and epistemological areas having to do with what's the correct life to live, what's the correct theory about reality, metaphysics, and how do we know all these things. And here's a list of some of the topics that would come up in any of those disciplines. So under morality, we see questions about virtue or the good. What is virtue? What is the good? What is law? How should laws relate to our seeking of the good? What is justice? What is friendship? Down there on the bottom, you see what is piety. So there's the question of the euthyphro. And all these, not all of these, but a lot of these come up in Socratic dialogues, these very basic sorts of questions. Under metaphysics, you see we're on the difference between being and becoming, appearance and reality. You'll see that in the Gorgias. Power. What's the correct use of power? What's causality? Are we free? What's the nature of God? And on epistemology, epistemic knowledge, what is truth? What is knowledge? What is certitude? Can we be certain? What is perception? What is explanation? What is philosophical method? All these would require a method, a way of figuring answers out to these questions. And we're kind of going to put that off for just a bit, although we've talked a little bit about it. Certainly definition would be part of that method. Socratic dialectic would be part of that method. And argumentation is something we'll talk about in an upcoming lesson. But besides this intellectual side, there's another side. We might call it the motivational side, the affective side, the moral side. So there's what you know, and there's how you use it. So Socrates says at the end of the apology, if I say again that the greatest good of man is daily to converse about virtue. Remember, virtue is another word for the good. And all that concerning which you hear me examining myself and others, and that the life which is unexamined is not worth living. So you have to not simply know the truth, you have to love the truth. That's the motivation part. The philosopher is a person who loves the truth above all else. There's a I call it an effective ordination to that. How do you love the truth? What kinds of motives should you be worried about? So what you would want in a philosopher is love for wisdom itself and the desire of an intellectually, morally, and spiritually integrated life. bringing everything together so that my search for wisdom, my intellectual search, is motivated by a desire to succeed at that and to love it for its own sake and not for what I might get out of it, which might be one's glorification. So, for example, if you learn philosophy merely to score points in an argument, or as I put it, exposing the intellectual inabilities of others. Socrates was accused of that, of making the the weaker argument the stronger. We wondered about this when we looked at Euthyphro. Was he just trying to embarrass Euthyphro? Another thing we'll talk about, particularly in the next reading, is a love for persuading others to do what you want them to do, as opposed to persuading them about the truth. Okay, so which should be the proper goal of education? Should we teach people to think critically? That's something that we talk about today. So the point of all this is to make people who are critical thinkers and not worry what they're thinking critically about. Okay, if you remember when we talked about wisdom, we talked about that as a fundamental view about reality and about all the parts of it that tells us how reality is, what the human good is, and how humans ought to achieve it. So there's some content in it. And Plato's point is that if you're not motivated correctly, you're very unlikely to succeed in your quest. So what might be some habits that we would need to keep our desires rectified, on the right track? And this is where I think the apology gives us several suggestions. Okay, so the first one I have in no particular order is detachment from worldly goods. Wealth, reputation, fame, good connections. These are the sorts of things that are going to tempt us to use philosophy, use our ability to get them. So if we're detached from them, we won't be tempted when we stand to make some money or some points because we are good at philosophy. A single-minded and single-hearted devotion to truth and wisdom. So a unity of life, that we live and profess what we profess. So we're not hypocrites. A couple spots here in the apology where you can read where this is mentioned. A willingness to oppose common wisdom. Okay, courage, that what people think might not be right. Now, it might be right, but we need to know that it's right because we see it as right, not simply because that's what everybody thinks. So there's one of the reasons why getting out of the cave is thought to be a situation you want to be into. Intellectual humility. So there's Socrates, his point that human wisdom is not worth much, that we could always be wrong, and we need to realize that even our best theories might need to be corrected and rethought. And a sense of vocation to practice philosophy as a way of life. All the schools in ancient Greece were places where people would go to live for a long time. They looked a lot like monasteries, where there was not simply a course of studies, but there was a way of life that people practiced. Might include particular diets and exercise and other sorts of things to mold them to be a particular kind of person as well as a good thinker. Now, I think this sets us up at least to think a little bit more about Euthyphro. And the next thing you're going to find is a discussion forum on the topic of how does Euthyphro fare? Oops, looks like I spelled fare wrong. It should be F-R-E. What habits does he lack that seem to get in the way, or how do they get in the way of his succeeding in his conversation with Socrates? Okay, so this is something I want everybody to post at least one answer, pick one, and give a kind of a fairly well-developed answer that, point out places in the text that you see him doing this. A quote would be great, and explain why this shows, for example, he's not very detached from worldly goods, or he's not got this single-minded devotion to truth and wisdom. And then come back and respond to at least one other person's answer about how this would work out. Okay, you'll find that forum once you get out of this lesson.